To these guys, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Adam, and this is my colleague John, and we're going to talk about what we think of when we think of checklists and Ansible, these two ideas kind of meshing together.
So checklist 0, item 0, remember glasses, totally forgot to do that, so let's have a read. Okay, so what is a checklist? So Wikipedia define it as a type of informational job aid used to reduce failure by compensating for potential limits of human memory and attention. It helps to ensure consistency and completeness in carrying out a task. Well, for me, it's just an ordered bullet list of tasks and subtasks that I essentially just check off every time I finished it. But
Thus, our talk is a checklist. There we go, that's task 1 checked off. We're going to alternate back and forth over the next points. So I'm going to talk about use cases, especially trying to think about where checklists have kind of come from. So they've probably been around since the invention of writing, I guess. But one thing that probably everyone thinks of when you say, oh, name me a checklist, the thing that might come to mind is a pre-flight checklist. In fact, this is one of the first really ordered use of them. The US military actually invented the pre-flight checklist when they found a plane that was too complex to fly and people kept dying. So they stopped the people from dying. You might think of the military as well, because the military uses a lot of checklists for operations. They're often doing things over and over again, and obviously precision is very important. Checklists also exist elsewhere. For example, in the open source world, you might have a checklist for your contributors to look at. Here's Ansible's module checklist. So these are all kind of things that aren't really testable automatically. They're the things that you should run through before you submit your pull request or whilst it's in review. For example, the first step here is your shebang line should be user bin Python, and the second one is that your module should support Python 2.6. Also, when I think of checklists, I think of my first checklist ever, at least that I can remember. It was a task given to me by my dad. I had to make a checklist for shopping every week. And my mum could then print out a copy, run through what's in the cupboards, and compare it to a checklist, and like go, yes, we need more apples, no, we don't need more bananas, etc. I think the funniest details on here are that, like, we've marked bakery, it's bad, don't buy too much of that, Mum. And also, when my brother and I left for uni, we had to stop her buying too much fruit because it kept going rotten, so we had added the line for 2. So, check.
So, the advantages of checklists. So, as systems become more complex and we introduce new technologies, the front-end developers have a new framework to use, and a tech lead decides we need to use microservices. The systems become so large that it's very difficult to remember and understand how all the interactions go. So, by building a checklist, you can have a playbook that essentially is just or storing all your information in a playbook. So. It's very easy for human memory to forget things, basically. Also, as you acquire companies, you take on new businesses with new technology stacks, and you need to get up to speed pretty quickly. So having checklists in place is a very quick way of transferring knowledge between the new systems. Also, by setting up checklists, you can plan ahead. So it means you can basically think about the problem, break it down into smaller tasks, and from that examine the individual steps and look for possible or capture more detail and look at high-risk items. Checklists are reusable. It's especially useful for tasks that you don't carry out very often. So we have tasks that may happen every 3 months or something like that, and you're never going to remember what's going on, so it's just much easier to run checklists for that. And of course then there's early morning PagerDuty calls, which I'm sure everybody's had. I don't fire on all cylinders when I wake up at that time of the morning. So although you can't have a checklist for every single case when you have a problem, you can have a checklist for actually dealing with the company requirements, such as communicating. We communicate over Slack. We have a mission control window, so we can let people know what's going on, open up a Jira ticket, explain the issue and the possible solutions, so that you can run a post-mortem the next day. Yeah. There you go.
Cheers. So that's one more. Talking about techniques that we use then. So I think Ansible Playbooks basically are checklists. They're a list of things that need doing. They have an order, and by reading them, you kind of get exactly what's going to happen. So like the Nginx is going to be installed, the configuration file is going to be installed, this file is going to be copied over. And one of the good things I think about Ansible is that if it did stop working, or if like it got banned by your company or the government or whatever, you could manually execute your playbook still. It might take a bit of time and might take a little bit of effort, like debugging what modules we're doing, but for a lot of them, you could go into a server and run the commands yourself. I also like that it's ordered, unlike some other configuration management systems. So the order makes it really easy to debug and also to explain and pass over to someone. Another technique we're using is actually using Ansible Playbooks as manual checklists. So you might not know this, but there's this pause module that you can have a prompt come up, and you need to press enter to continue. So then you can have a playbook that is a list of manual steps. Perhaps there's a system that's very hard to automate or not worth your time, so you can just have a series of steps like go and log into this dashboard and then click foobar and wait until it completes. Yeah, as I said, when a system just isn't worth automating, it might be worth making this at least. I'll reference you to XKCD here. They have a grid of how often you do the task versus how much time you save by automating it, and whether it's actually worthwhile. Another advantage of this is that you can mix automated steps in with your manual steps. So perhaps you might write a manual playbook on day one, and then like a week later you figure out you could use the API for these 3 steps, and you found some module or code to do that, and hopefully by the end of it you'll have a fully automated process. We also use checklists in a slightly more human setting where automation doesn't really exist. So on our Jira tickets, you can write a list like this on Jira, and you get a nice, pretty graphical checklist here. And then when we're planning ahead, we will write up the manual checklist for how to get this task completed, like some new service deployed, and some of it will be writing code, but other bits will be like communicating with teams. And by having it in an accessible place on a ticket, then everyone can see what's going to happen, where we're at, and what has happened. And just another hint, you can do this on GitHub too. Here's the syntax on GitHub, and the nice thing about this UI is that you can actually just click on the boxes, and the front end edits the markdown for you, so you don't need to spend ages messing around with your keyboard. So I'll hand it back to John.
So, conclusion. So, checklists are very good for encapsulating information. I mean, the reason behind this talk, or the idea behind it, was that I was reading the book Sully about the pilot Chesley Sullenberger who ditched his plane in the Hudson in 2009. He's got the book is. The film, I think, is all about the story, but the book is just entirely about his life and how he's very interested in safety systems and sort of checklists and how they can be applied to other industries. However, even he pointed out, not every situation could be foreseen or anticipated. There isn't a checklist for everything. But there is always this when worse comes to worse. So, yeah. Thanks.
And with that, we've completed our checklist. Thank you. Are there any questions? Also, we're obligated to say, timeout is hiring. Thanks.